Hello, everyone. Welcome to Con2Couch. In today's episode, we've got New York Times bestselling author John Ringo, who will hopefully be joining us very soon. And we've also
I hear birds chirping in the distance.
author Mike Massa
I like to do this outside.
Neuroscientist Dr. Hampson, who's also very famous science fiction author. I'll go ahead and turn it over.
Start this off on a high note.
So
good. I have no idea if Mike took us live. If he has, this is the best part.
We are live. And we are live.
Mike, are you introing us?
We are live.
Okay, guys. Hey, how's everybody doing? Welcome to Con2Couch. This is the virtual science fiction fantasy podcast / panel. And today we have a couple of really special guests for us to talk about what project that they've worked on in the past. And I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Mike?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Massa. I write science fiction, fantasy, military science fiction, post-apocalyptic fiction, and nonfiction. Most recently in John Ringo's New York Times bestselling Black Tide Rising Universe, as well as my own properties, mostly published through Bain, but also through Chris Kennedy Publishing, and I'm delighted to be here.
Rob, take it away.
Hi, I'm Rob Hampson. A lot of you know me as speaker or speaker to lab animals from conventions. I am a research scientist that also dabbles in science fiction. I write both for Bain Books and have an anthology out, Stellaris People of the Stars, and one coming out this winter, called The Founder Effect, and also have some property out with Chris Kennedy Publishing as well.
Awesome. Well, we were supposed to have John Ringo with us today, but he is running on classic John time and may show up late. And if so, we'll give him a chance to introduce himself, but probably doesn't need an introduction to this crowd. Let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about today. You guys helped with and eventually co-authored some stories in the Black Tide Rising universe. What has been described as the most realistic zombie fiction out there. Within the restraints of being as realistic as you can be about such a topic. Can you guys kind of give your perspective on the universe if someone had never come to it before, how do we introduce them to it?
Rob, do you want to try that, or shall I give it a swing?
Well, let me just say that John Ringo called me up or emailed me and said, "Hey, can we talk?" I wanted to call. We spent a couple hours on the phone, and he plotted out this idea. And the one thing he said is, "But it's got to be hopeful." At the tail end of it, it's all about the people who go out there and do the necessary job to rebuild. But in the meantime, we're going to have fun tearing down all of society in the process. So, but from the start, I think that what we have is very unique in zombie apocalypse genre because it's all about the people rebuilding and not about society falling.
I'd add two more things that make it distinctive, and kudos to John for this. The first is that these are not magical zombies where you can cut them in half and they crawl across the park in an effort to reach their destination. They're still humans. They've just literally lost their minds. Think rabies times 10. And the second piece is that instead of having your point of view characters making really bad decisions, you have point of view characters making really, really good decisions. And by and large, most of them surviving as a result. So it's a thinking science fiction fans subgenre, as opposed to your average zombie film where they stumble from place to place making horrible choices along the way.
I think that was one of the things that first jumped out to me about reading it. And for those who haven't read it, the initial books follow a family who kind of become the nucleus for the recovery of society. I wouldn't even say rebirth. It's more like a rescue mission than anything else. And at no point are they like, well, I guess this is the time to split the party. And all right, we're going to take all the guns with us, but you guys should be fighting. There's not a lot of bad decisions, which we see in other zombie fiction as the way to build tension. Like, that's their only method of building tension. Whereas in this one, it's the problem solving is the tension building. So that is kind of a whole new thing on it.
With the possible exception of going to a concert in Washington Park. I see somebody in the comments has added that particular bad decision.
Well, it was a bad decision, a heavily armed bad decision, but a bad decision nonetheless.
They carried their mitigation with them with full of stuffed magazines. The third component I forgot, and I should have added to what Rob said, is that there's a recurring element of humor, both to serve as a part of the book that the reader enjoys because it's genuinely funny in places, but also to illustrate how people under profound stress both deal with the stress at the moment as well as afterwards through some pretty dark humor. I'm thinking of the scene where they do a swim call on a beach on a semi-cleared island, and to illustrate her point, Faith picks up a skull and is using it as a ventriloquist dummy. It asks the stupid question and she answers it.
So you guys, obviously, I believe both of you were consulted pre the release of Black Tide. Can you kind of think of what your initial thoughts were of like a realistic zombie horror? What were your initial like kind of bumps thinking about it?
I'm like, zombie apocalypse fiction peaked about 5 years ago. John, why are you doing this? That was my first thought. And then I read some of his initial manuscript and I went, holy crap, this is really good. And then I got to the part where he scraped off part of my soul and used it to power his book and went, that's why I've been feeling so empty recently. Because that's what John does. He steals part of your gestalt and applies it to his work. I think all three of us have had that occur to us.
Yep. That's definitely part of it's the fey promise of being friends with John, that at some point you're going to read a book and go, oh, that was me.
Well, you're taking the barge challenge, are you? Oh, well, you're going to lose.
Rob, what were your initial thoughts when you kind of heard it pitched?
John will probably tell you I'm the guy that shoots down everything he says. Comes up with a really great idea, and I go, yeah, it doesn't work that way. But I loved the idea because he let me play in the sandbox with him to develop the disease. And so I'm a neuroscientist by trade, and so I used a little bit of what I knew, what actions, what viruses, what drugs, whatever have the effect of removing the ability for higher thought. And we played back and forth, and John and I actually worked back and forth on this. This is the aforementioned 2-hour phone call where we were working out some of these details. And then he says, okay, so I want the big hook for running through this thread that they need something and they can't find it and they can't find it and they can't find it. And I propose this. And I go, yeah, that won't work. He says, why not? And I said, well, because all you need is, and I gave him some alternative. And he goes, oh God, those things are all through the military. I said, yeah. So he's, so we were, I think he was talking pipette tips, and I told him he could use ballpoint pen barrels. He wasn't too happy with that idea, but I loved the idea because, again, these weren't magic zombies. These were science zombies. They weren't dead. They weren't animated by some mystical power. There was a very logical reason why they were the way they were, and it was so much fun. And really, and all I did was help him shape it. He had the ideas to start with, and they were fantastic.
So we have science gone wrong has created these, or science gone right. Who am I to determine? And at this point, I don't think there's been any conclusion as to who's done this. Like, it remains this great mystery throughout. Oh, Rob is snirking in known knowledge, always a problem. But
John has always said we don't know who did it. Mike and Gary Poole and others generally turn and stare in my direction when he says that.
Well, now that we can watch you closer, that's good to know. So the problem is not a person in this story. We're not looking for the great bad guy. We are looking at the problem as a whole. And the main characters in the initial story seem to solve that by heading out to ocean. Just get away, creating some distance on the matter, and then working their way back. Were these ideas that, like, you guys kind of like, was that something he came up with initially, or did you help out with the idea of, like, just get on a boat, get away?
Didn't come from me.
So I question the utility of going to sea in a small boat for a long period, depending upon the intensity of the pandemic as well as what's happening offshore. There are times during which if you head east off the Atlantic coast in a small boat, you're suicidal. So this is not your basic go-to. I had when I left, I did an interval of consulting to high net worth family offices, which is code for the lawyers that service the multi-billionaire set. And one of the customers was she's one of the youngest female billionaires in history, and she ran a fashion line. I'll say no more than that. And her spouse had retained a young, recently separated SEAL who'd put together a plan for them how to escape Manhattan if things went horribly awry. And the plan he gave them was, what we're going to do is we're going to buy an inflatable small craft with a gasoline powered outboard, and you're going to zip across Long Island Sound up to Long Island and then somehow magically get to your property there. And I went, well, you've got a 4-month-old child. Let's say this happens this winter. You're going to go down to Long Island Sound in December in a small craft, dodging all the crowds with your then 6-month-old baby, zip across the water and walk on foot to your place. Okay, that's a plan. It definitely is a plan. It isn't a plan I would take my 6-month-old infant on. And so I tried to bring a degree of realism to some of John's writing, because he said specifically he wants to avoid the really bad decisions that are used to create tension in other examples of the genre.
So again, we come back to the idea that this was the realistic zombie response. And again, we're not talking magical. We're talking science zombies. I'm going to have to find out an acronym for that later. But in general, what were your kind of thoughts when you started writing into the universe? Like, how you wanted to take this story and how you wanted to look at it?
Roberto?
Well, I got invited in for a couple of the anthologies, and I'm working on a project on my own. It's been kind of slow developing. I like the idea that John emphasized the rebuild and the recovery. And so one of my thoughts was to take neglected areas that everybody says by conventional wisdom are not going to survive a fall of civilization, and show that that's not necessarily the case. People come together, people are resourceful. So in the back of my brain, I've got ideas of what to do with Hawaii. I took my short stories into the mountains of North Carolina. And I actually based this on an incident where I had a car breakdown. I was a newlywed. My wife and I had gone to a state campground, and my car broke down when I was out getting supplies. I was at a convenience store in nowhere, North Carolina. And basically, we were rescued by a local who took us back to the barn that was better equipped than most automotive shops. And he got us fixed up in no time flat. And then come to find out that he built cars for stock car racing. He built tractors for tractor pulls. He monitored the CB radio and would go out and rescue the big rigs that ran into trouble on the long climb, 7-mile climb of I-77 going into Fancy Gap, Virginia, which is a really steep climb. And this is what the locals do. So for my stories that were in Black Tide Rising and Voices of the Fall, I went there because I love the idea of people being resourceful and banding together and figuring out how they're going to work it. And also at the same time, one of the things I explored was making a family out of fragments. And so you have a man with 4 sons and 3 daughters-in-law, of which one son survives, 2 of the daughters-in-law, and a scattering of grandkids. And he takes in people who are cousins, and they make one big giant family. I love working in that. So it was great fun to take that aspect of the stories.
I've been privileged to write 2 novels and 4, about to be 5 short stories published in John's Black Tide Rising universe, ranging from the very beginning when we still had civilization, and John had invited me to submit a story to the very first anthology, a story called Battle of the BERTs, where BERT stands for Biological Emergency Response Team, aka sort of an unholy alliance between bankers, gangsters, and New York City cops to collect. And this is a spoiler for the first book, to collect the spines of the undead, if you will, to get the tissue from which they can extract the pathogen and use that to create some kind of medicine or a vaccine or something that they can use to create immunity for the survivors. And then later, other stories where atypical heroes, somebody who's profoundly on the spectrum, or something outside the United States. What happened in the Vatican, the fall of the Vatican and the zombie horde. And then a couple of novels. And it's allowed me to explore a lot of different facets of his universe. I think I might be the person who's been able to contribute the most pieces so far to John's Black Tide universe, I think, so far. Chuck Gannon, not on the call, tremendous author, just released, is it still an e-arc, or is it out now on hardback, Rob?
It's still an e-arc.
Okay. So it released an e-arc, is a novel by Chuck Gannon set in John's universe called At the End of the World. And he explores the idea of life on a boat further, all the way down from Tierra del Fuego to the Caribbean. But so I was kind of all over the place in that answer to explain how the universe allows for you to explore many different facets of the human condition in the story, all over the place, geographically and emotionally.
Yeah, it's not a localized story. This isn't the world revolves around obviously the main characters are instrumental to the world, but the world does continue to move. The world does continue to go on. Which is kind of something that I always appreciate in this story, in the Black Tide Rising. In most zombie fiction, it's a singular rotation. And in this, there are many rotations kind of coming together and pulling into an eventual outcome, but you do find out that there are other things going on. There's more than just the heroes, in effect.
Well, what's really fun about how this was set up in John's original set of 4 books, he introduced a number of characters, and then you didn't see them again, and you wondered what happened to Tom Smith, the security guy. And then, of course, you find out in Mike's books, he introduces he introduces General Montana, and the character is awesome and has been explored in some of the short stories. And I have heard conversation that maybe that should then be some more novels in the series. Again, I want to take a look at some of the other places. Gannon has gone in other places in the world. We still have an entire West Coast. We have the central part of the U.S., all of which can be explored, and some of it's been explored a little bit in the short stories. There's a lot of potential out there.
The readership is strong. The sales of the subsequent novels has been very strong. The sales of the anthologies broke some records at Baen for hardback, full size anthologies.
Yeah.
And John asked at his direction, not my idea. He again, if you've read River of Night, instructed me to insert some hooks which would permit him, if he chose later, to connect this universe to another very popular universe of his. And where he's going to go with that, I can't say for sure. But it generated, his fans immediately caught the reference and went, wait, what? So we'll see where that goes. But that also promises, if he chooses to go in that direction, would bring a lot of heat, light, and adventure to the universe and keep it going.
My headcanon is that every John Ringo universe is connected, that they're all the same place.
Yeah, if he pulled some kind of Robert Heinlein and his next novel is about the multiverse, and then he like brings characters in for a jousting tournament like Heinlein did in Number of the Beast, holy crap, mind blown. And he could pull it off.
The only thing I think that would be difficult would be to merge the Troyverse, because after all, they're supposed to be concurrent. You can't quite get the Troyverse and the and a zombie apocalypse. Although I did hear that the Vorpal Blade universe is, that black box is actually a virtual reality simulator. So this is all just a simulation anyway.
Exactly. They could even begin naming their universes according to who landed first in Heinlein. They had the timeline they would name for who was the first person to get on the moon, right? In Rob's universe, it's you're from the Plague universe, or you're from the First Contact universe, or you're from the BDSM universe.
To pull back in, now that we've gone way out of the topic zone. What were kind of one of the staples that I think happens in zombie fiction a lot of times are the aha moments, where suddenly someone's like, I've got it, I've got the plan, I know what we're going to do here. What were some of your favorite aha moments from this?
My favorite aha moment is part fiction, part reality. One of my favorite aha moments is in Under a Graveyard Sky, where they learn that a young molecular biology postdoc had figured out a way to do what the virus that they have discovered, the zombie virus, has done. And so it's the science trick. And again, John does a great job with melding science with fiction, is an actual trick. This is a unique property. And so the virologists and infectious diseases experts go digging through the scientific literature. Has this ever been done before? And they come across this young postdoc who had an idea, and his professors and the principal investigators and faculty at his department said, no, it'll never work. So he goes home to a private laboratory, home lab, and makes it work and publishes. And when it's made known that here is a guy who actually might know something about this mechanism, let's bring him in and have him look at what we have and say, is this your technique? Is it another technique? What do you know about this? Well, immediately the FBI says, number one suspect. And they arrest him and they hold him. And of course, one of the things they won't do is they won't let him talk to the doctors who need to pick his brain for this information. I thought that was a great aha moment. And then what did Ringo do? But in the acknowledgement in the very front of the book, he leads off with, Oh, and I want to thank Dr. Rob Hampson for teaching me everything there is. John, you just made me suspect number one. What is this? So, but I love and my second favorite aha moment is late in the fourth book, and our General Montana character, when we find out who he is, and he's wearing his combat gear, and he starts opening Velcro pockets and pulling out patches, and he starts slapping patches all over his uniform, revealing exactly who he is. That was my favorite aha moment, other than the uh, Public Enemy #1 moment.
John's books are so packed with favorite moments that I can't. It's hard to pick my favorite aha moment. There's a side story that begins in book 2 about two enlisted Marines who are surviving in an inflatable life raft. I think it's book 2, might be book 3. And the last order they were given was take care of this officer who's sick. He's a second lieutenant or first lieutenant armor officer, a Marine officer, and he's been infected with the pathogen, and so he's a zombie now. And these guys have PTSD times up to 11, but they're given this order. They're going to take care of this guy. So they've been keeping this highly infectious, lethal zombie alive in a very small inflatable life raft and keeping watch by almost becoming sort of boot camp Martinets. Everything is very literal. Everything is by the book, and they get rescued. And the person that rescues them, who's a civilian auxiliary, is like, what do I do about this? And so she has to get in contact with one of the few surviving active duty Marines for advice, like, hey, Gunny, how do I handle it? Oh, this is really dangerous. All right, what you do is, and he leads her through the steps on how to make sure these guys don't go even further off the deep end. You can't just out of hand shoot the zombie. They'd react, let's say, negatively to that. So once again, John is very true to, for fans of military science fiction, he's very true to some of these nuances and flavors and textures that make up the military experience, and then translates that in the form of his characters into how someone who hasn't necessarily directly served, and he does it in a way that's digestible and funny and true to life. And he does that throughout these books. So I can't pick a single one. I did my poor best in my 2 novels and some of the shorts to have similar aha moments or bring some of those nuances to life. And if Rob, if you can think, if you've read either of any of those, if you think of one, then I'll respond to that. But John just packs it in.
I will say that probably my favorite aha moment is the Beatles and dealing with, like,
Yes.
dead bodies are a problem. Like, just in general, they weigh a lot, they smell terrible, and getting rid of them is somewhat difficult if you don't have access to a pig farm. And they figure, one of the characters is like, I know how to deal with these bodies, hold on. And he goes and gets carrion beetles and just leaves them in the area. He's like, we'll come back in a few months. This should all be taken care of.
Ooh, the mechanicals, the wind driven and other forms of power driven ways to attract zombies and have them mechanically mulched and ejected into the water to feed the sharks. So the sort of the practical bloody mindedness of an intelligent person dealing with a crisis. So that's pure. That'll be a really good aha moment.
I had I'm watching the comments coming up on the feed, and somebody mentioned when Faith is going into the voyage under the stars, and the sub skipper is reminding the crew decorum as they're watching, and they're all swooning over Faith and her backup plan. So,
oh, you mean set to the tune of Chumbawalla?
yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of, as you pointed out, Mike, a lot of moments where you're like, aha, there are, like, John's novels are packed with that, a number of moments. What do you think was your takeaway where you were like, yes, that's how you really should be dealing with zombies? Because I have a particular favorite of like the tactical side of dealing with zombies in this world. Do you guys have one?
Yes. So he correctly identifies that zombies are really not a dangerous close combat opponent because they're unarmored and effectively unarmed. And if you are wearing heavy clothes or light armor, bunker gear, you're pretty much impregnable. Even if you get swarmed, as long as you don't have anything exposed, you're probably going to be okay. Probably, depending upon numbers and so forth. And the other thing that he brought up is, if you're used to snooping and pooping and being really subtle and being really quiet, use a suppressor, you're going to find yourself walking into a room, and after you're all the way in, then they're going to wake up and come after your ass. So never be rude, always be polite, knock to announce your entrance. And so that way you can know how many zombies are in the room you're about to enter. And that's turning what we would regard as the tactical paradigm on its head.
That's definitely one of them, how much that shifts. And when Faith begins discussing with a very grizzled veteran, I'm like, whoa, this isn't how we do things. That was definitely an aha moment. But the bunker gear was actually mine. I really detest sleeveless shirts during a zombie apocalypse. That seems like a terrible idea. And the next thing that always seems like a bad idea, and I see it everywhere, are when guys are throwing on ballistic vests. Like, they don't shoot at you, bro. They're going to chew on you. Like, I thought.
Although to be fair, a lot more guys got shot by their buddies in training. They never got shot by the bad guys until about September, until the war on terror started.
That's definitely a good point there.
There's actually a very early aha moment, and John nods to it. He includes the fact that it is an aha moment by writing it into the story in terms of a sort of appreciation for the unknown designer of this disease. If you're going to have somebody lose their mental capability and have to exist for some time, normal bodily functions are going to be an issue. And John deliberately made it so that a portion of the disease was to cause them to strip naked. and Mike is chortling there. But by the zombies being naked, it solves a major issue with any creature that is living, because they don't live in their own wastes at skin contact. So
We'll
that
make
was
it difficult to turn it into a movie, though. That will be problematic.
loincloths.
Yeah, the in my second short for his second short for his universe, I point out there's a young man who's profoundly autistic, and he's always been cautioned, among the things he learns to live his life by rules is always make sure you put your clothes on, have your underwear on, never be caught in your all together. And at one point he finds himself in a zombie scrum, and he reflects for a moment. There's a lot of all together showing at the moment because he's kind of put off by the fact that this zombie's junk is flapping around while he's fighting. He's like, whoa, that's hey man.
Having fought many naked people, that's not fun. There's no part about that that's enjoyable. We may do another show at some point where I'll talk about that, but it'll have to be after hours.
I don't know. I don't think you can drop that bomb about fighting naked people and then just walk away from that. I think you got to expound just a moment.
Okay. Well, I'll give you, for those who aren't aware, in my misspent youth, I spent close to a decade as a bouncer and bodyguard working in a very rough city. And drugs are kind of a thing, and drugs sometimes make people get naked. But personally, the worst experience I ever had was a young man threatened to pull a pistol upon me. So I embraced him in the sleepy time hug. And when he was out, I was like, well, I better check and make sure he doesn't have a gun on him. So I began patting him down. And you don't want to slide your hand on someone. because if they have a sharp thing that's going to poke you, that's going to stick you, and that's generally considered bad. So you do a lot of patting. It's called a pat down for a reason. So I patted down till I got to his waistline. I felt the waist of his pants, and I started patting around to the front looking for a gun, which in several other incidences, it had been how I found guns on people. What instead had happened is he was wearing sweatpants. And during the sleepy time hug, the pants had come somewhat lowered, and I found myself, this hand has never felt clean again. I just want to be clear with you. And my partner watched this happen, like was watching it take place, saw where everything was going, said not a word. Want to say, Stafford, if you're out there, I remember you. You're a jerk. So yes, fighting naked people is not fun.
There's and actually the ick factor of fighting naked people is something that characters in this universe have to adjust to. And in fact, one that is rather experienced at fighting in close quarters, who's a woman, ends up coaching another person who is who's just doing it for the first time, also a woman. She's like, you gotta get it over it. You just got to get past that part. And this is why I carry multiple machetes and knives and prefer a shotgun, because I can end encounters quickly. And weapons tend to break, or you lose them in the scrum, and you got to get over it and keep fighting through it.
I think that's a really good a good transition, that we can talk about something that I know the audience of any zombie story wants to talk about. Guns, lots of guns. There are a number of firearms in the Black Tide Rising universe. Some of them I agree with, some of them I do not, but probably actually the time for this. But face reliance on shotguns was something I heartily enjoyed, because shotguns don't hit people. They tear giant chunks out. There's not a lot of shotgun wound survivors in the world, especially with buckshot. Was there anything that, like, you guys, when you were writing, you particularly enjoyed firearms-wise, or even weapon-wise, something that jumped out to you and was something fun to write with?
I like the settling the debate once and for all that a H&K 45 USP can function underwater. I already knew the answer, having actually done that, but it was fun to see it in a book finally. And of course, now that it's happened in a book, in a fiction book, the issue is settled, right?
I liked the argument about the Barbie guns, because there is a notable piece of zombie fiction out there that was a book and became a movie that was all about all you need is a 22 and a headshot. And I may not have the experience of you guys, but I do know enough about the brain to know it ain't going to work that way. And there have been many people who have survived headshots if the round does not have enough energy, enough velocity when it hits, if it hits a glancing blow or anything like that. And the observation, Faith loved to refer to them as Barbie guns, and how they were just not as effective. They were the neat thing about this is, again, these are living creatures. These are biological zombies. The only thing different is that they don't have higher mental capability, which means that the stop has to be get the heart, do major damage, get the head, or anything of that sort. The fact that they don't feel pain means that most of your incapacitating wounds aren't going to stop them. So you need hard stops. And the fact that this was built into the universe from the very start, that shotguns are an excellent choice, because, okay, just losing a finger or getting a chunk taken out of your arm, or just having something lodge in the fleshy part of your buttocks, get a bullet in the butt, is not going to stop a zombie. but if you hit them with enough lead, or you hit them with the buckshot or the slugs or anything like that, that'll do a hard stop, then you've got something that works. So I really loved the Barbie gun arguments in the books.
I think so. I'm going to take a contrary position. I know that the discussion around the Barbie gun, because in the mythos, Mattel, also manufacturer of Barbie toys, made components for the M16 series of rifles in the 60s and the 70s, as the story goes, and there's both truth and fiction to that. In the first 4 books, first 3.5 books, we go to extensive efforts to show, we the audience, to accept that the small caliber, high velocity round is not as good a choice as a slower, larger round. And there's arguments ad nauseum in the book where the characters argue back and forth, with the protagonist seeming to prefer and be correct in their selection of a 30 caliber round or a 12 gauge buckshot load. And then we have the assault on the London medical facility, where he who walks as death in the night, Montana, puts all the patches on, as you point out. And there, our point of view character, who rocks a shotgun and hates Barbie guns, watches in awe as he puts a headshot into every zombie at close quarters and wasting not a round, and basically holding off hordes by himself while the rest of them are flailing around. So I think that points to the value of having round placement and a lot of bullets to place correctly over super. I mean, 12 gauge buckshot is a very heavy round. Holy crap! I mean, I've played breacher, and when you carry a complete set of breaching tools and your shotgun and your ammo, and of course the shotgun rounds I carried were 30% plaster or other material for taking out locks and door frames and hinges and whatnot. It's heavy, so heavy. And I'm trying to imagine doing that in fireman's bunker gear. Oh, good Lord. You have to hydrate concurrently, and post-hydrate to stay conscious. It's crazy. You'd sweat your balls off. Pardon my language. You'd sweat a lot.
I think there's a lot to be said that this is an aspect that I see in fiction a lot. As a gun guy, authors aren't always the best at gun stuff. John has called me a couple of times, said, "What do you think about this scene in this book?" And I go, "That is completely inaccurate. None of this is correct." And he goes, "Awesome." And then he writes it anyway. And I'm like, you could have saved me the call. That would have been fine. But you know what? I'm happy to help. I think there's something to be said that Faith versus Montana are 2 different characters, and therefore their POV are allowed to have different realities upon them.
Sure.
And as a reader, I think that's sometimes something we miss, is that each person's point of view will be different for that reality as they experience it. And that's something that I kind of take into anytime I read something. I go, well, that's not right at all. It's like, it's not right for me, but that character's experiences are different.
To your point about guns and experiences being and varying by character, if as a reader or an author, you approach the series where it's not going to resolve the gun argument, the gun question, or the debate, but if you accept that it's a cracking good yarn with amazing action sequences that work, and the characters have reasons that are arguable but real reasons for what they do and what they prefer, then you're golden. If you're going to it thinking, all right, clearly this point of view is right and that one's wrong, and therefore I'm the argument is now suspended because it's been won, not so much. There's a great scene where the main protagonist of the series, the principal point of view, Faith, has been given responsibility for a group of assaulters, and she's conducting a pre-mission inspection. And before the mission, she goes through, before the inspection, which is going to be conducted by her subordinate, she goes through and makes things deliberately wrong on all the different Marines' gear, things that reflect her experiences, things that she screwed up. And then she observes the inspecting officer conduct the inspection, and then to see if that person catches the mistakes that she planted. And during the course of the error, like, the person complains, "Really? Like, you forgot to put a firing pin back in your weapon?" She's like, "Yeah, we were cleaning up in between runs, and I was in a hurry, and I went back in, and the gun didn't go bang." So that was pretty much an all hand-to-hand combat episode. So that was something that I could relate to, because I've done those sort of pre-mission inspections, and even people that are experienced can forget, especially if they're tired or they've been doing back-to-backs.
I mean, 200 hours is where we start making mistakes. So we've kind of walked all over this universe, and I think we've avoided a lot of spoilers and then given a few away that only make you want to read a little bit more. Do you have any favorite lines? Because that's another one that I actually have a favorite line, and I'm going to go ahead and tell mine first. I'm going to be greedy with this one. It's actually a song lyric, and it was I love the band. Hadn't heard this particular song until after this story. It's hard to light a candle, easier to curse the dark instead. And that, I think I set the book down. I set the book down and went and pulled the song up and listened to it, which is another symptom of reading John's work. But that was definitely my favorite line. And if anything, wow, I've now turned that into when I give talks on disaster preparedness and stuff, I mention that line as a statement of like, you're in a bad situation. Don't get caught up in complaining about it. Start working the problem. But do you guys have a particularly favorite line?
I do. Do you care who goes first, Rob?
Go for it.
Book 4. For reasons that I won't spoil, Faith goes on an entirely unauthorized high-value target recovery mission to rescue somebody, and breaks all kinds of rules and regs, and it puts herself tremendously at risk. And as they issue forth, she discovers that her sister, also a point of view character, but not as big a role, who flies helicopters, is going to steal a helicopter and provide air support. And the quote that the sister, when asked why, the sister says, "Because air support doth cover a multitude of sins." And I put the book down and started laughing my ass off, because it's so true. If you're a tactical unit commander and things are in the shit, and you're like, "Oh, this isn't, I'm gonna get, this is just effed up," and then you're able to call in air support, and poof, the bad guys go. You're like, all my bad choices are now no longer relevant. The bad guys are in a crater. Life is good. Air support does in fact cover a huge amount of sins, where sin equals your other than good decisions. Let's say, I won't call them bad decisions. I make no bad decisions, just not optimum decisions. I wasn't. Go ahead, Rob.
I love the line where troops were not allowed to disturb the alligators. Why? Because the lieutenant says professional courtesy. But my favorite line actually comes from Valley of Shadow, and Michael wrote this in that Dr. Curry had stumped his colleagues by inventing a made-up disease that was quite plausible and was better than what his fellows could come up with. And as a prize, he was awarded a stuffed neuron, and it hung proudly on the wall of his office. Well, this showed up in the book. I read it in the e-arc about a month after Mike visited me and saw the stuffed neuron sitting in my office hanging on my wall.
Because you were on your last nerve.
So yes, I was on my last nerve. But yeah, that's actually, for many reasons, that's my favorite line in the book, although the professional courtesy comes close.
Well, we've talked about a bunch of stuff with it, and I think this might be a good time to start talking. What are some other projects that you guys have in the works? What are some other things that we can start expecting from you?
Let's see. Recently delivered and have since been published, is available. The first in a 6 novella series in Chuck Gannon's Kane Riordan Terran Republic universe, published by Chris Kennedy Publishing, CKP, called Shakes. And no spoilers other than to say, in his story, a major plot element is that aliens kidnapped soldiers of all nationalities from about 1935 to about 1990, when those sailors, soldiers, or airmen were in a condition of battle where they were going to die and their bodies not be found, and so they were snatched up and put into cryosuspension. Flash forward 200 years, and the aliens want to make humanity look bad, so they're using these lost soldiers to commit what amount to war crimes and atrocities. And when those people figure that out, they're reasonably exercised about what's happened to them, and they take some action. So that first novella is called Shakes, is out, and the second novella, also by a vet, is called, I want to say it's called Obligations by Eikenberry, and that's also available through CKP. Currently working on my own novel, The Genius War, where some special places achieve sentience and interact with humans, and they've been fighting a war for thousands of years, and our little squabbles are just sort of a blink in the timeline for them. And then lastly, working on a short story set in this universe, actually set in the John Ringo Black Tie universe, for his third anthology in the series called We Shall Rise. And it's going to be the story of how we get coffee back in the universe, because coffee is required to make the military run and make the government wheels turn on time. And we're running out of freeze-dried coffee. And there hasn't been fresh coffee in a long while, and this shall not stand.
Well, I've got a mass market paperback release coming out this summer on Stellaris, People of the Stars. This is an anthology that grew out of Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop, and it's about 1/3 nonfiction, talking about some of the problems that we will face as human society as we move out into the stars. There's a nice nonfiction article by Michael in there about securing the stars, as well as about 2/3 of the book is fiction, stories about what are humans going to become. That was actually a great inspiration for a in fact, it just showed up on the feed for The Founder Effect, which is an anthology that my sister and I have put together. That is about the myths and legends that are generated with Earth's first interstellar colony. That is, we have a cover. We have just gotten some edits back and are starting to work on that. It will be released in December through Baen, as is Stellaris, is through Baen. And so I've got a couple of those anthologies, doing a lot of short story writing, but Tony teased this with the last roadshow, but we have entered into an agreement. I'm starting to work on something that is a retelling of the $6 Million Man. That's a story that had a great influence in my career, my professional career. And I have long looked at it and said, yeah, but that's not how some of this works. And so I'm going to try to fix that. And so I am working on that now, and we'll see how that goes. It's going to be also submitted to Baen, and a few little projects with CKP as well. So
I immediately heard the sound effect when you said that. I immediately just right away. So plenty to come from both of you guys. We are going to be calling the show right about now. In about 30 minutes, dear audience, if you are interested in hearing more stuff about publications and interested in winning some free books, Baen Publishing will be doing their virtual roadshow over on their Facebook page. And if you've never been to one, it's a great time. If you have been to one, it's an even better time. So absolutely head over there and enjoy some electronic con experience. Pretty soon, who knows, there'll be whole hours of paneling from a multitude of different places for this stuff. And guys, I really want to thank you, Mike and Rob, for coming on and having the moment to talk with us for our second show. It was an absolute blast having you. I'd also like to thank John Ringo for writing this universe that we could have so much fun discussing.
And thanks, Jack. You've been great as well. This is quite enjoyable.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to having you guys back on. I know we're going to be doing a number of other topics and everything, and we'll be bringing you back on for some of those later. So, and audience, if you've got something you want to see, if you've got a panel idea, please hit us up with it. We'd love to hear about it from you, and keep working with you guys and giving you what you want to see.
Sounds good.
All right, signing off, guys. Thanks for coming out.
Arrivederci.
Thank you.
All right, just like to thank everyone for coming along today. Sorry about the technical difficulties at the first part of the stream. Unfortunately, we didn't have Mr. Ringo with us today. I think he ran into some other kind of a delay, but we'll see about getting him back on as soon as we can. Thanks again for showing up. Thanks for bearing with us, and let us know what you want to see in the future. If you see fit, give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.